So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Casey Messick-Braun, and I'm the curator at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. And I want to begin today by just extending my heartfelt thanks to Sean Kramer for convening this colloquium and for curating Irreplaceable You, Personhood and Dignity in Art, 1980s to Now, which is, of course, the exhibition that brings us here today. I know that Sean conducted deep research into important and oftentimes difficult topics, ultimately organizing an exhibition that is timely, thought-provoking, and deeply meaningful. He has also introduced me, members of the BCMA staff, and the campus community to compelling contemporary artists, at least one of whom is here today and we will be hearing from soon, and many of whom were not previously represented in our collections. And I could not be more impressed with the work that Sean has done to realize this project, and even more proud to host Irreplaceable You at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. I, of course, also want to thank all of today's speakers, including our next two panelists, Sayantan Mukhopadhyay and Joshua Rashaad McFadden. Sayantan and Joshua will each share more about their curatorial and artistic practices respectively, before engaging in a robust conversation during which we will welcome questions from all of you. So with that, I am thrilled to introduce Sayantan Mukhopadhyay, who is the Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Portland Museum of Art here in Maine. His recent exhibition, As We Are, features 14 emerging artists with strong ties to Maine. Prior to the PMA, he served as lecturer in the Department of Art History at University of California, Los Angeles, and as research assistant in the Scholars Program at the Getty Research Institute. Mukhopadhyay arrived in Maine by way of Los Angeles, Shanghai, New Delhi, New York, Montreal, and Kuwait. He holds an MA and a PhD in art history from UCLA and a BA in comparative literature and art history from Williams College. With that, please join me in welcoming Sayantan Mukhopadhyay to deliver his presentation of Friendship and Form, Dayanita Singh's Myself, Mona Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Casey. Thank you so much, Sean, and everyone here at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. It is truly a pleasure to be among colleagues and friends, and really to share in the bounty of Maine together and share my research. This is really meaningful for me because since arriving to Maine, I have somewhat had to rebrand as an Americanist, but that is the nature of the beast, and it's something that I've taken up quite happily. But today I'm returning to my doctoral research, and it's very exciting to be able to share that with folks here in Maine. I'm a South Asianist by training and I guess South Asian by birth. And my doctoral research was on Indian contemporary art in the 80s and 90s. So really excited to see the ways in which it overlapped and mapped onto Sean's project. So today I will be talking about a photo book that came out in 2001 by photographer Dayanita Singh titled Myself, Mona Ahmed. The book traces the life of its titular protagonist, Mona, but it also serves as a document of the developing collaborative relationship between Mona and Dayanita. In the book, you will see photos interspersed with text, ekphrastic titles of singular images, as well as letters between Mona and the editor of the publication at the Swiss publication house Scalo, a certain Mr. Walter. Dayanita Singh and Mona Ahmed met one fateful day in 1989 while Singh was on an assignment to provide images for a newspaper article, a project that would ultimately never materialize. Mona Ahmed was a hijra living in New Delhi, and I'll define that term in just a second, born into a dominant caste Muslim family who had rejected her when she began claiming her gender identity openly. She later went to live with her guru in a hijra household where she would eventually adopt an abandoned baby girl named Aisha. Mona always yearned for motherhood, and much of the first half of the book details Mona's adoration of her daughter. Aisha would be later seized by Mona's guru, Jaman, when she came to believe Mona was unfit to look after her. Mona would then find herself doubly cast aside, this time by her own community, and became determined to live outside the bustle of the city, moving to a small plot of land in a Muslim graveyard. She ultimately succumbed to intense depression with the loss of her daughter, though by the end of the story, she started to receive the medical help to begin her healing. Singh followed all these developments studiously with her camera over the course of a decade, charting these developments in the last 10 years of a millennium in one of the most acclaimed projects to date. And her first as a professional photographer, following a photo book that she executed of famed tabla player Zakir Hussain as a student in the 1980s. Now, to properly contextualize this project, it's essential to situate Mona in her status as a hijra, so as to better delineate the very specific queer experience that she embodies. This endeavor generates problems relating to translatability, an issue that has hounded hijras since British occupation, when foreign officials designated them as a puzzling problem, and we're reminded again of the Palestinian problem, that needed a solution. If using identification commonly employed within the Anglophone global north, a hijra might best be understood as a trans-feminine, non-binary gender identity, indigenous to South Asia, with very close ties to histories of princely courts, religious practice, and performance. In the present day, hijra communities are largely centered in urban areas where they're organized into affiliation groups based on guru-chela or teacher-disciple relationships. Members of these gharanas, or households, perform at auspicious events, including marriages and childbirths, based on the district that they have been informally assigned. Most hijras make their living through donations and alms received in exchange for singing, dancing, and blessings, or bharai, which are then shared communally by their gharana. Many still engage in sex work to further make ends meet, as well as to cover costs for any gender-affirming surgeries they choose to have. The term has often been flattened and insufficiently translated into common Anglophone parlance as transgender, including in contemporary legal discourse, or to eunuch, as is used in Myself, Mona Ahmed. This is a word that has been in active circulation in India since the British Raj, when colonial officials needed an English equivalent for their approbatory records. Whereas transgender might be considered a term more closely associated with identities claimed by members of the globalized Anglophone elite in India, and which can be better folded into Euro-American discourses of gender identity, hijra has specific connotations relating to cultural, social, class, as well as sometimes biomedical practices. Eunuch, on the other hand, is a term that focuses on castration rather than gender expression, and therefore prioritizes a language that centers sex and passing over gender, a frustration that Mona herself expressed to Singh when speaking of journalists' fascination with her body. While some hijras do partake in an initiation rite that involves the surgical removal of genitalia, it's not always considered essential to the expression of hijra identity. There are therefore multiple complications that arise in the translation of the term, with the effect of leaving a gap between the Hindustani word and its English counterparts that do not account for its particularities. And all of this is preamble to say just how kind of complicated this very specific kind of South Asian gender identity and its histories are. I'd like to talk today more specifically about the dynamics and the relationships between Singh and Mona herself. Singh mentions in her introduction that Mona was highly particular about the selection of images that would be included in the final publication. According to Singh, Mona vetoed scores of options, carefully curating her self-image and also editing her archive, thereby determining the way she will live on in public memory. Furthermore, as revealed in Mona's letters to Mr. Walter, the editor at Scalo, she evinces a penchant for narrating life on her own terms. These letters provide social, historical, political, and personal context for the reader/viewer, but also serve to establish a platform for Mona's own thoughts to come into focus, creating a mood in the book that is oftentimes in tension with the more jubilant images lensed by Singh. The letters and the images thus both claim the importance of Mona's own artistry, creating a meaningful dialectic between aspirational images of herself and her inner turmoil. In her letters, in her poses, and in her active selection, Mona exerts a form of poetic control and agency in this work, actively troubling Singh's authorial mastery. It is evident in this careful balance of participation in the project that Mona is herself a creator in this process. Mona's desire to assert and perform her own image offers an anti-ethnographic stance, taking back representation into her own hands while refusing the camera's ethnographic gaze. The collaborative element, just here's some more beautiful images of her and Ahmed and her daughter Aisha. The collaborative element in which both myself, Mona Ahmed, and Dayanita Singh are emblazoned on the cover of the book that we saw at the beginning speaks to alternative forms of art making that do not resort to the model of the modern master, the archetypically male voice that creates in a vacuum out of sheer genius, often obfuscating the labor of those instrumental to the means of production. Historically, this has regularly included people such as models, oftentimes women, used in paintings or photographs, or it can be the role of the spouse or a partner who is present to provide support during the process of creation, who goes unnamed. Perhaps at its most reductive, Mona might be considered Singh's muse to supply subject with no control. This would fall back on the imbalance of power that you can see in a kind of painter-model dynamic, artist and laborer, which of course has close ties to sex work and the sale of the body. Yet Mona's assertions and demands to speak for herself and to have an active role in the production of the object provides a radical template for how art making might transpire and be understood. It dislodges Singh as the singular voice and places her in a complex network wherein photographer and subject share in their act of creation. The myself that starts the book, belonging neither entirely to Mona nor to Singh then, comes to exist somewhere in between the two. Over the course of 158 pages, Mona will attempt to define a myself in an image, and Singh will lend her own myself to it in an ongoing process of negotiation. The myself can thus be read as a dynamic entity, one that changes across the book and through time, trading hands while bearing witness to all the peaks and troughs documented in Mona's life. The myself is then also shared outward to the reader/viewer, who gains their own sense of a myself in their active engagement with this visual record. While contending with the reader's own myself, they are hopefully encouraged to confront any prejudice, phobia, and ignorance they may have arrived with. In this life-affirming enterprise, the reader/viewer looks, learns, and in the best circumstances, changes. A resistance to the static subject, shelf-stable archive, and reader/viewer is everywhere in myself, Mona Ahmed, beginning in a title that offers some semblance of fixity before taking it away and redistributing it outward. Mona obsessively dwells on the absence, loss, and melancholy that has characterized her life. The failure to achieve her aspirations for family and motherhood in any traditional sense propels her depression, which she details extensively in her emails to Mr. Walter. The first image in the book, seen on the right, foreshadows the prevalence of negative affect in Mona's story. The photograph is one of Mona later in life, clad in a simple cotton sari that envelops her so that only her face, gazing outward and to the side of the viewer, is visible. She sits inside a patch of unkempt grass, bordered by a wall of rough-hewn brick. Trees frame the far background, and a lone street lamp punctures the sky to the right, around which crows swarm. Mona's face is diminutive as she draws within, enraptured and tormented by her own incessant thoughts. It is as though she's haunting her own life, dejected to the point where she has moved beyond the world. The white of her sari is a color typically reserved for mourning. The caption reads, sitting in the jungle, I am complaining to Allah that the little joy I got in my life from Aisha was also snatched away from me. Image taken from 1999. At the outset, the viewer is primed for a story where loss and melancholy are central to the subject of the work. In her first letter, Mona declares, "Today I am alone. Today there is no one to explain or help me to understand. The links between melancholy, sadness, and failure and queer life is well documented in a vast literature concerned with queer affect studies. Queer theory has made a case for understanding lives that do not simply conform to teleologies of progress and betterment that compulsory heterosexuality and heteronormativity frequently entail. Theorists such as Jack Halberstam, David M. Halperin, and Lee Edelman, among others, have suggested that there is instead a lot to learn from moments when things do not go as planned, when joy succumbs to sorrow, and when pride is cannibalized by shame. Heather Love has further defined the prevalence of loss in queer cultural texts as the backward turn, in which loss and modernist melancholia are focal to understanding modernity at large. Indeed, Mona's story in many ways narrates these returns to sadness, the persistence of melancholy due to the loss of her biological family, the loss of her lover, the loss of her adoptive daughter, and the loss of her fellow Hijra community when she moves to the graveyard. Her stories, in other words, could be read as one of queer loss and longing in a world that continually refuses her to give her solace. This negativity is a force to be harnessed, acting as a countercurrent to the exigencies placed on happiness, progress, and hope within the logic of late capitalism. In the same breath, however, Mona consistently reiterates her devotion to Dayanita and the steadfastness of their friendship. In her first letter, she states, "From childhood, I have never received such true love from anyone but her." This relationship has provided Mona with a sense of comfort, and at times even hope. And so while one side of Mona's life charts her loss, it is also constantly framed by the support and the love of a friend. In a more recuperative reading of the text, therefore, the bond between Dayanita and Mona is foregrounded. It is the accrual of trust, the nurturing of affection, and the promise of dependability that the book ultimately recounts. In a photograph from 1998, Singh turns the camera on herself, the length of her outstretched arm visible as the lens faces upwards towards two faces in an analog selfie. Mona's sullen face rests on Singh's shoulder, a withering glance cast across her countenance, but evidently at ease in present company. Singh tilts her head to the side so that their foreheads rest against each other. This reflexive act, intimate and caring, results in the only image in the book where Singh and Mona are seen together, whereas Singh's presence is only ever implied as the person behind the camera in all other images. The inclusion of this photograph lays claim to the strength of their bond and signals Singh's investment in both the project and in Mona herself. The final book is not only an objet d'art, but also evidence of this process of enmeshment. Myself, Mona Ahmed, is at its core a story of this friendship itself and the time through which it passes and grows. It is evident, however, that the relationship between Singh and Mona is asymmetric, not simply in the artist-subject dynamic from which it initially grows, but also in their greatly unequal access to privileges. Singh is a wealthy, urban, cis woman, recognized and named by the gallery system as a fine artist, while Mona, despite having come from a middle-class background, has been relegated to a marginalized status within Delhi's highly fragmented social landscape. There is the fear, then, that the relationship between them could be read as exploitative, one in which the artist transforms the queer body, otherwise undervalued and characterized as society's expendable excess, into art for consumption by an elite art viewing public. In this light, Mona's body is simply a medium for a message. She offers Singh credibility as an artist, someone who's able to capture beauty where others might not see it. It is arguably a form of appropriative violence in which Singh gains recognition from someone else who suffers continually from systemic erasure. In a letter, Mona states, "It was destined that we should become friends. I am sure she never dreamt that a eunuch could become her best friend, and I am sure people ask her what she sees in me, but she has never bothered what people say. From childhood, I have never received such true love from anyone." In this statement, then, Mona identifies a defiance of expectation that establishes why such an entanglement is so unexpected. She also notes how the love between the two transcends and exceeds the love one might expect from biological kin and romantic partners. She goes on to say, "Now it feels like she is my own blood." Friendship is a type of solidarity that is particularly powerful in the face of imperial capitalism and far-right post-colonial nationalisms. It flies in the face of heteronormative modes of affiliation that prioritize and value reproductive union, the heterosexual couple formation and the parent-child unit that promise property ownership, consolidation of capital, and progeny. Many romantic bonds support the machinations of economic markets in this way. And through this churning machine, society can continue its neat ordering, guaranteeing the future of the nation and the operations of the state through its regulations of culture and of law. In such a system, the notion of biological family supersedes all other relationships because those are likely to be the most enduring, blood being thicker than water, as the adage goes. Friendships, on the other hand, hold no such promise. Friendships exist simply because, a fortuitous alignment of feeling and circumstance. In some, they are fickle and operate outside this constant generative drive. As in the case of Dayanita and Mona, friendships offer radical conjunctions that might not otherwise be available in relationships created through ties developed in romance, business, or biological kinship. Dayanita, a member of Delhi's cosmopolitan elite, and Mona, a Muslim hijra, are brought together through the force of friendship in a way relationships sanctioned and supported by the state might not typically allow, particularly within the complex social structures of India, where religion, class, caste, and gender hyper-regulate the kind of relationships that are possible or even feasible given the spatial politics of urban environments. Myself, Mona Ahmed, is therefore, in part, the story of a critical solidarity that embodies the secular democratic ideals of the Nehruvian national vision. But that project was never realized by the nation state and has been firmly displaced in the 21st century by the rise of a fascist Hindu nationalism, seeking to eradicate such cross-cultural ties altogether. It is therefore a relationship that defies expectation and normative logic. The possibilities offered by an asymmetric friendship, such as Mona and Singh's, resonates with Jose Esteban Muñoz's account of queer politics of incommensurability, which centers on the relationship between gay Black writer Gary Fisher and the leading theorist Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick. When Fisher died of complications from AIDS in 1994 at age 32, he was entirely unpublished. One of his mentors, Sedgwick, whom Fisher had met while studying at Berkeley, subsequently undertook the task of editing and disseminating his work, published in 1996 with Duke University Press. In his essay on Fisher and Sedgwick, who was also Muñoz's own advisor while at graduate school at Duke, Muñoz discusses the attendant politics of a white female academic championing the work of a person of color. While Singh and Mona are divided along the lines of class, gender, and religion, Fisher and Sedgwick are separated by class, gender, and race. In both their geopolitical contexts, they represent incommensurable pairs. Muñoz asks the reader to consider Sedgwick's involvement in Fisher's erotic fiction as a way to escape the individual sovereign subject in favor of a larger sense of the commons. He suggests that these two incommensurable actors exceed a sense of equivalence, thereby denying the authorial, the masterful, and the singular. The paradigm he envisions resituates our notion of praxis as something that is shared, existing between individuals rather than belonging to any one person. It is a way of being with or alongside others rather than being positioned against them. For Muñoz, a collaboration such as one between Sedgwick and Fisher results in a queerness as a sense of the incalculable, and simultaneously an incalculable sense of queerness, generated in the cosmic distance that exists between the two authors. Muñoz does not argue that these socioeconomic, racial, and sexual gaps are somehow miraculously bridged through these instances of partnership, but rather that this partnership offers new ways of sharing and sharing out work while upholding this alterity. Just as Sedgwick cares for, attends to, and distributes Fisher's work, we can see Singh doing something comparable with Mona's images and words. Incommensurable friendships and their ability to cut across boundaries friendship thus offers a new model for interrogating both process and product in myself, Mona Ahmed. Friendship was the cane-making bond that allowed the project to come to life, born of two people who became increasingly knotted in each other's lives. The friendship is, as such, one of the materials and conditions of production, while also serving as an understated subject in the work as Singh's camera follows Mona. Through friendship, Mona and Singh extended the relationship between artist and subject to become collaborators and co-creators. The photographs are visual traces of the lingering gaze and the intimacy that a friendship can allow. And it is in the queerness of this friendship, the affect that it generates, that the book develops and claims radical stakes and creates unexpected diagonal attachments that are highly meaningful. In this sense, the relationship between Mona and Singh is an instance of queer conviviality, a term that I borrow from Jasbir Puar, in which the encounters between different assemblages does not create a universal politics, but rather offers ways for alterity to suggest new means to understand one's own position in the world. And I just wanted to leave you with this one last image that was taken in 2013, just before Mona passed away, and Dayanita titled it Mona and Myself.
Thank you so much, Sayantan. I'm gonna mute this for now. That was a really fascinating talk, and I look forward to speaking with you more about it after we hear from our next presenter, Joshua Rashaad McFadden. A visual artist and assistant professor of photography at Rochester Institute of Technology, Joshua is known for exploring identity, race, masculinity, and memory through portraiture and archival imagery. His award-winning projects, including After Selma, Come to Selfhood, and Unrest in America, have earned honors from the International Photography Awards, Communication Arts, and Time Magazine. McFadden's work has been widely published and exhibited, with his 2023 Lucy Photo Book prize-winning monograph, I Believe I'll Run On, further establishing his impact on American visual culture. So I would like to welcome Joshua to the podium to share his presentation, Love Without Justice, Protest, Mourning, and Love Ethic. All right. So let's try this with a brief technological intermission. There we go. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Thank you to Sean for putting my work into this amazing show. We laugh about how we're just pen pals for over a year now, but to finally kind of meet and talk about the work together is great. So it's great to be here, and I'm happy to share a little bit about my work with you all, which is almost in a new way for me because I never talked about specifically these two bodies of work together only. So we'll see how it goes. But I want to start here with two quotes. The first being from Christina Sharp from In the Wake. In the wake, the past is not past. The wake that is not past reappears always to rupture the present. And then the next from All About Love by Bell Hooks, the great Bell Hooks, right? There can be no love without justice. Abuse and neglect negate love. And so these ideas that the violence of history continues to rupture our lives deeply informs the two projects that I'll talk about today, which are Unrest in America and Love Without Justice. So starting here with Unrest in America. So again, Christina Sharp reminded us that In the Wake is not just aftermath. And when she talks about In the Wake, she is illustrating the wake, which is the rough water behind a ship. And so she's talking about a slave ship and how we're always in the wake of that ship. And there's turmoil behind that ship. And so it's the ongoing condition of Black life. The past does not simply sit behind us, neatly closed off. It presses into the present through state violence, through mourning, through the fragile acts of survival, and resistance that we choose to make every day. So starting here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I actually just returned from Minneapolis, Minnesota, revisiting the aftermath, looking at the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in 2020. Then I flew home for a day, and then I flew here after missing my flight. But I'm happy I made it. So starting here with one of the pieces that's actually in the show. So along with the rest of the world, I was coping with the effects of social isolation during the shutdown in response to COVID-19. And since then, the pandemic has changed all of our lives. Yet for Black Americans, the virus wasn't the only thing and the only trial that we faced. Racism and police brutality continued to lie in the wait for our lives. And much of my photographic work aims to shed light on these and other issues within the Black diaspora. And so on May 25th, in 2020, George Floyd, an unarmed Black man, was murdered by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin in the street. And outrage, protests, and social media commentary all erupted as the video footage circulated and was replayed over and over again. Footage of the police officer, Derek Chauvin, forcing his knee into Floyd's neck for over 8 minutes, slowly choking him to death while 3 other officers stood by and aided in the act. And we heard "I Can't Breathe," as you can see on this young man's shirt, escaped Floyd's mouth over and over during the confrontation, as he also called out for his already deceased mother, straining for his final breaths. Those words became an outcry, became a plea, and became also a devastating question. Can police officers see humanity? It's a phrase that we've heard before, actually. It echoed, reminding us of the lack of compassion and the absence of empathy, and the brutal way of policing of Black bodies have been normalized. We've heard these words before from Eric Gardner, who also lost his life due to police brutality. And he also cried out, "I can't breathe," as officers took his life. So Martin Luther King said it best, but it's not enough for me to stand by before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the intolerable conditions that exist in our society. A riot is not the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear the promises of freedom, that the promises of freedom and justice have not yet been met. And so going back, this is when I first arrived to Minneapolis after hearing of what happened to George Floyd. And quite literally, I parked my car. I don't know where I parked it. I just kind of got out, started going down the street, and I saw the protesters coming towards me. And so I was going in the opposite direction. And that's how this image was made. But then as I got closer and closer and closer to George Floyd Square and throughout the community, these are the things that I started to see. So as you can see, like the sun was setting here. And then this was at nighttime. And so we'll jump around in the photos. With scenes around Minneapolis. And so when Floyd's life was stolen, and it felt like the entire world's heart had broken, and I felt it too. And so for so long, white America has drawn upon every reason to feel impartial towards law enforcement's killings of Black people. But during the pandemic, with no other distractions, the world was forced to watch as police officers once again revealed an undeniable act of racism to the masses. American citizens had no choice but to witness it and choose which side of history they would stand on. So again, after hearing about the news, I was compelled to travel from Rochester, New York, to Minneapolis, Minnesota, not only to document the protest, but to bear witness to the stories of this community and see its truth for myself. And once I arrived there, I just stayed. After some days of being there, I began to document for publications like the New York Times. And then I ended up documenting this for over a year, all the way through to the Derek Chauvin trial. And so this image here shows another name, Daunte Wright, on the ground. So we see Daunte Wright. And that is, I believe, from the first week that the trial of Derek Chauvin started. And another young Black man was killed at that time. So, you know, it was this ongoing thing. And so overnight, we saw that show up at the George Floyd Memorial site. And so, and then this was the last day of the trial when the verdict came back as guilty. And so people were gathered at the Cup Foods store, which is the store where George Floyd was when he was murdered, right out in the street there. And that's where the crowd was gathered. And that's the photograph that I made. This is an interesting photo because it's pretty dark, right? But you see this like spotlight on this person. And so this was when a curfew was enforced, and when a curfew was enforced, but also people were also still working, right? And so if it's after hours, I don't know, 11 or 12 in the morning, some people were just walking home. And so then the police would flash their light on a person and eventually shoot them with a rubber bullet. And that's what happened here. So Atlanta, Georgia, unfortunately, my time on the ground didn't end with Floyd's death. It seemed like that summer, these killings were happening back to back to back to back. And so I drove to Atlanta, Georgia, the very night I arrived to Atlanta, word began circulating about the police killing of Rashaad Brooks. And I did not go to Atlanta because that happened. I actually went because I needed to get things out of storage. Because I had moved to Rochester from Atlanta in 2019. Then of course the pandemic happened. So I wasn't able to get all of my things or move all of my things at once. So I figured since I'm already on the road, I'm gonna go down to Atlanta, get the rest of my stuff out of storage, and then go home. But when I got to Atlanta that night, Rashaad Brooks was murdered. And so I woke up to that news, and then I began to now document that story in Atlanta, Georgia. And so we see, again, similar scenes. I mean, they were already protesting for George Floyd, but now for Rashaad Brooks. And then from there, I went on to Louisville, Kentucky, to cover the Breonna Taylor story, which we know was also being protested at the same time as George Floyd, but wasn't receiving the same amount of news coverage or outcry. And so it was her family and friends who started the hashtag to get awareness out about what happened to Breonna Taylor. And so with this story, I photographed her family members and friends, and it was a much more intimate and quiet story within all of this. And we start to see Breonna Taylor's reflection in her loved ones. As well as her partner, Kenneth Walker, who was there that night. Her apartment. This suburban area, which seems strange, right? But that was the Attorney General's home. And so there was a lot of controversy about the Attorney General. I think he had like a engagement party, you know, that same, when all of the turmoil was going on. And so people were questioning, you know, did he really care about the protest and all of that? And so activists showed up at his front lawn and did a sit-in. And then Tamika Palmer, who is Breonna Taylor's mother. And so again, that summer, I continued to photograph the different protests across the country. This is in Washington, D.C., at the March on Washington, the commemoration of the March on Washington. And then I ended up back home, finally, right? Ended up back home, finally. And we get more news that another young Black man was killed by police, but now in my hometown. And this actually happened before, I believe, George Floyd. But of course, the tapes weren't released. And then the tapes were finally released. And now I find myself documenting these protests again, but now in my own backyard. So next, Love Without Justice. And this, again, this title comes from Bell Hooks, who I love, in her book, All About Love. And she says, there can be no love without justice. Abuse and neglect negate love. Care and affirmation, the opposite of abuse and humiliation, are the foundations of love. It's a testimony to the failure of love practice that abuse is happening in the first place. Love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. And when we choose to love, we choose to move against fear, against alienation and separation. The choice to love is a choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other. So in All About Love, Bell Hooks argues that the presence of justice is indispensable to the experience of love, highlighting that the essence of love is nurtured by nurturing behaviors and positive affirmation, while it is determined by the maltreatment and disregard. So I'll start here with this project. So this project kind of started all over the place for me, and was photographed over many years. I could argue that it's still going, ongoing project maybe. And so at first I was just making pictures, self-portraits, images of nature, photographs of everyday objects, still lives, if you will, photographs of family members, lovers, friends, and so on. And I didn't know exactly where it was leading. I was just creating. But then the project started to really take form, and a different deeper direction when my grandmother passed away. And so this photograph, actually, I think I made as a child, and I just kind of remembered that I had this photo, but I had to find it. So I asked my mother to actually look for it, and I found it. So this was made, with like one of those instant cameras, Kodak cameras. And I was I was amazed that I was interested in this photo wall here at such a young age, because there's nobody in the photo, right? But I wanted to make a picture of this wall of pictures. And you can kind of see, like, I'm short because it's like from my point of view. So it's like interesting, right? And so even back then I knew that it was something important and I wanted to document it. But when my grandmother passed and we went to her home to clean out the home and salvage anything that we wanted to keep, I saw the wall and it was empty. And so this is the photo that I made. So I essentially remade this photo many, 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 many years later, standing in the same living room, looking at the same wall. And all of the photographs had been taken down, divvied up. I guess different family members decided decided what photos they wanted to keep. But it got rid of our grandmother's curation of that wall, right? And so when I think about this photo, now I can remember, and we can remember like what she felt was important and how it should be displayed. And so that kind of sent me on this journey to now go back and sift through the photos that I've been making over the years and try to, put this kind of body of work together. And I began to think about, well, what am I trying to do? And I realized that I'm going back and I'm having this moment of memory recall. And this is me. It must be my 6th birthday, I think. I don't see the candle, I don't know. But there's 6 balloons, so maybe I'm 6, I don't know. But I have this like flower on my head, and I think about like the queer child. I didn't really want a football, I wanted a flower, because I enjoyed flowers. And I said, okay, maybe we're getting somewhere. And what does it mean to want to now return to the archive and reinsert myself into this archive as myself today? And so how does one navigate the representation of Black mourning and interiority within natural landscapes, in the creation of a self-portrait situated in such environments? I adopted an intuitive approach to following my emotions to guide my composition and process. And so in 2018, I created this photo where I wanted to confront the symbolic bereavement associated with my estrangement from my traditional family construct. Ideally, or really when the queer child feels they have to leave the family structure to go somewhere else to figure out who they want to be, to become themselves. But what does it mean to go back? And so I was acknowledging my decade-long disengagement with my familial ties. And so this introspection led me to draw parallels with my project, Love Without Justice, to explore history. And so back to the day my grandmother passed. Well, not the day my grandmother passed, but the day that we buried my grandmother. And I made this photo of my mother in the backyard of my grandmother's home. And so we saw this kitchen chair that was randomly outside. And so I pulled it up and photographed her sitting in that chair in the backyard. And so we see kind of an overgrown backyard. Things are kind of growing out of control. I think they try to cut down these flowers, but they just kind of grow wildly. And those flowers are actually, my grandmother brought those to Lansing, Michigan, from Alabama. I found that out later. But it's interesting finding out these things as I continue to look at the work. And so we see that my mother, she just lost her mother. She was carrying that loss in her body, in her face, and everything. And it wasn't an easy moment to photograph. It was a moment filled with grief, vulnerability, and pain. But it was a moment of love ethic because we're showing up for each other. And I also did this with my older brother. And so, again, it's about this love ethic, not just being a feeling, but an action. And so that action for me is with the camera, is rooted in practice and care and responsibility and respect and truth. And so then I have some pages from the book, and I think this is important because I was able to kind of finalize my vision of inserting these images back into, let's say, a family album, right? So inserting images that I made along with images that I collected from my grandmother. So you see the process of connecting my familiar roots. I undertook a comprehensive examination of my family's archival materials, which involved collecting and digitizing these family photographs. And so I had to go now to other family members to retrieve these items, to get them back, to begin to basically create a database. And so on the right, you see a photograph of my grandparents, my grandmother and my grandfather in Harlem, New York City. And this is after they left Camden, Alabama, to move to New York. That could be considered part of the Great Migration, to have a better life. And then on the left, you see a little tiny mini afro there. So that's my grandmother's sister, so my great aunt, who chose to stay in Alabama. And so it talks, this kind of juxtaposition talks about that conflict there, because my grandmother at that time was the only sister that left, right? And so that was kind of their dynamic that they never really kind of talked about. Here on the left, we have a photograph I captured while sorting through my grandmother's belongings on the day of her funeral. The scene remained untouched, so it offers a glimpse into her daily life towards the end of her life. So she passed of cancer. And so we see her side table, so that's where she would sit. And so she had the things that would bring her comfort. She had hair grease, a comb, a toothpick, coffee mugs, makeup, and it just kind of tells a silent story of the things that brought her comfort and what she wanted to be close to. And then on the right, again, we see another photograph of my grandparents when they were in New York City, in Harlem. 1964. And I believe on the reverse sides, those are notes to my great grandmother. And so they would have these photos made and send them back home. Yes. So to identify as queer signifies a dislocation from the traditional nuclear family structure. Queer young adults frequently seek solace in belonging to chosen families, as they may not endeavor to reintegrate with the conventional family model. And upon my return to Rochester, New York, I figured out that it was in fact my engagement with the photographic practice that facilitated my homecoming, enabling me to commence the application of what Bell Hooks calls love ethic. This endeavor was fraught with challenges, yet its significance extends beyond the individual, holding profound implications for future generations. And so here we see on the left, young queer men at a bar, right? Just very simple. But then on the right, we see, what does the caption say? Joshua sings in children's choir. So, singing in children's choir in my grandparents' church. But then on the bottom, my grandfather, on my father's side, when he was ordained as a pastor. And so, we can kind of just think about what conflicts that may have caused. And then we see the next image, which is the other image in the exhibition. And then in the installation of the work, the first installation of the work, there was actually a video piece where the archival images were shown just as an ongoing video. And then we see how these images are shown in this show here, which was new for me. And so even while I was documenting in the protests in Minneapolis, the fires, the marches, the mourning, I actually made this image of the embrace. Interesting, right? And so I was actually shocked that Sean was able to kind of draw that out, because you wouldn't really be able to tell only if you actually examine the dates, right? And so this image is actually In Love Without Justice, and that's in Unrest in America. And so we have this quiet moment of tenderness, of holding, and this image was made indoors. It was in the middle of the city. Things were burning, outside, the streets were filled with protest, with grief. But inside this room here was, I guess, a symbol of survival happening. And that is some of what it represents for me. It also represents two Black men holding each other, a softness, not fighting or running or protesting, and the opposite of the public death spectacle that always becomes the thing when those the lynchings and the police shootings happen, but also choosing tenderness in the midst of crisis and in the midst of chaos. And so I started asking these questions. What does it mean to create a queer embrace inside of public Black grief? What does it mean to make space for queerness, even if it's not immediately visible? You may see two Black men holding each other. You may not consider them queer when looking. But in that holding and in that embrace, whether or not queer, it's already radical. It's a quiet refusal of hypermasculinity. It's a breaking of the scripts that say Black men must be hard, defiant, distant, unfeeling. It's a survival strategy that queerness and Blackness often demands. Because in a world that tries to render Black men only as threats or as spectacles, tenderness becomes an act of rebellion. The embrace becomes a protest, and softness becomes a survival tactic. So even here, we see when streets were filled with fires and rubber bullets, we were choosing life, we were choosing love. With both of these images being made at the same time, it reminds me that when we are protesting in the streets or forced to publicly mourn, and for that public mourning to become a political act, if we think about Emmett Till and his mother, and for that to now have to be used as an act of protest, when that happens, we also have to make room for our interior lives. And so that our mourning is not only political acts, but also separate. And that to embrace the Black body in the middle of state violence is a refusal. It's a protest, and it's a commitment to life. And so, love without justice asks these things. What happens if we refuse to be erased? What happens when Black queer people claim our place inside the Black family archive, not as an exception, and not as a shame, but as a part of a living story and as a part of a embodied archive? The Black Family Archive, just like the public archive, has been incomplete. And as the film Through a Lens Darkly shows us, it holds both presence and absence, memory and eraser. But to enter that archive and to alter it and to reinsert insists that we are our full selves. And it's an act of rehumanization. It demands that we rethink what love is, not as an unconditional acceptance of harm, but as a commitment to responsibility, truth, and to justice. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again to Sayantan and Joshua. I think we're just going to set up some chairs so that we can have a conversation again. Well, thank you both again. I think my biggest challenge moderating is that I actually have a lot of questions. But I'm going to start out with one just to kind of get the conversation started, and then would love to welcome questions from the audience. So I was really struck in both of your presentations, the way that you were thinking about photography as, you know, a form of art, as a way to document. But I think you were also challenging the role of, you know, photography as primarily or exclusively documentary. Photography as a way to, Joshua, I think you said bear witness. And then also thinking about the role of photography as creating narrative or storytelling, especially with respect to sort of creating a queer narrative or protest. So I was just wondering if you could each, from your perspective or respective positions as a curator, so someone who is thinking about photography, and then as an artist, someone who's creating it, if you could just talk a little bit more about the distinctions that you see between, you know, documenting, bearing witness, and storytelling, and maybe you don't see a difference between them.
I guess it's strange because I teach photography as well, so it's like you can kind of get caught up in the genre, you know, and separating, you know, these methods of making. Mm-hmm. I don't see the difference, even though I teach it. You know, it's strange. I think there's ways that we can begin to mix these things, and that starts to make it makes the bodies of work richer for me. Yeah.
I want to start off my answer with an anecdote about when I submitted my dissertation for review by my committee. And one of the members of the committee is a photo historian. And her response to this chapter was, "You obviously don't know anything about the history of photography as a medium." And to which I responded quietly in my head, was like, that's not really what I'm interested in. It wasn't about photo as a medium and not necessarily the discourses of photo. I was more interested in kind of the kind of, so I come from a comp lit background, so I was actually really interested in narrative and how narrative is essential in relaying queer stories. You know, we're denied narrative, we're denied complexity, we're denied that kind of temporal element, that durational element. You know, I think about that today in all of the kind of news headlines where everything's distilled into like something that's bite-sized. And, like these people who are getting detained or arrested, you're not actually getting, these are people with complex lives, and that kind of gets taken away. And so I'm thinking about this photo project in particular, last 10 years. So for me, it was really about that, yes, the ability to not just tell a story through a single image, but how multiple images work together to bear witness over time. That over time is really, really essential, I think, in this project in particular.
Great. Thank you both. Are there questions from the audience? I think Sean's going to go around with a microphone. And just for those of you who are joining us, we're using the microphone so we can ensure that we capture them for the recording. So just wait for a mic.
Well, once again, thank you for absolutely fascinating, beautifully delivered presentations. I am very intrigued that the projects that you each presented dealt with both biography and autobiography. And I'm really interested in the way in which you each treated familial structures. And these are families that are blood families, but also chosen families. And as we think about questions of personal identity and our relationship to others in our community, I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on this really, really interesting blurring between autobiography and biography. And I'll let you take it from there, but I just was really struck by those exciting and interesting interconnections. And maybe this is a larger question about the relationship between the self and the other, and what those boundaries are and the degree to which they even exist. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne, for that question. I'm thinking again about the myself, Mona Ahmed title, and yet, presumptive that Dayanita's telling the story. But as you're flicking through this book, and I wish I had a copy with me, but as you're flicking through, you're confused about whose voice, and it's actually some of the stories are not told necessarily all that chronologically, and there's a performative element. So how much of this is truth, how much of this is embellishment, but that shared authorship in which biography becomes autobiography. It's telling the story of Mona, but it's really also telling the story of Dayanita also. And I think the more we understand that there is no auto without the other, that it's all kind of networked, all modes of production are networked. I think, maybe that's where the truth lies, is that it's in between. I don't know what your take is on that.
I think I agree.
Yeah.
I weave in and out of it. People have asked similar questions before. Mainly when I presented Love Without Justice, people wondered why tell that story so early. And I said, that's interesting. And with a lot of my projects that I didn't show, I'm always doing works about people and their lives, but also asking them to participating in that storytelling by either allowing me to display a handwritten narrative that they provided, or an interview, some type of their voice that I can include with the photograph that I make, so that there is that collaboration. Because I don't believe it's my place to just say, okay, I'm gonna tell you who you are, and then take that and present it. That's not my goal. And so I guess I just took that method and applied it to myself. And then there's a kind of a back and forth. So yeah.
It's funny how figurative painters don't always care. It's on the photographer, often that truth-telling apparatus of the camera. What do you make of that?
I think because it comes with a different kind of responsibility,
Sure.
Or it should, with the photograph and the camera, because the camera is always this violent tool. It's violent. Gordon Parks, I use this as a weapon. Yeah. it's my weapon against injustice, but it's always been a weapon against marginalized people. And so if I'm going to now use this tool, I have to be conscious of that and to question all of my my actions when using it.
Well, I think Sean and I had a conversation actually once about how even a lot of the language that we use to describe, you shoot a photograph, you capture someone. So, I mean, even just some of the violence of the language that goes along with that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And like slave and master, like
Yep.
Even within the lighting tools, that language exists. And I remember even at the university, we had to start changing like those labels because it's like these terms are very outdated, right? Yeah.
I was thinking, as you were as you were talking, and this is not really a question, it's just participating.
That's okay. You can participate.
As you were kind of talking about that in your talk, but then looking at the photographs you had made in that Love Without Justice series, and there is like no sense of violence. You get the sense almost as though sort of like the camera isn't there, that, that it is almost through, we're looking at these, people who, sort of through your eyes in a way, which I think is a kind of, it was making me think that, is there a possibility for us to get away from that idea of the camera as being this tool, this weapon of violence?
Mm-hmm. I think so. If people can, not people, well, no, people, right? Because you all have cameras, would consider that camera an extension of themselves, then I think they pay attention a little bit more to the photographs that they're making. If that photo that you're making represents like your ideals and what you're doing. Yeah, so I think that's probably what you're seeing maybe. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I was really struck by that image you showed of your grandmother's wall after it was deinstalled, and you see the ghosts or of the pictures that used to hang there, and what you said about how the individual pieces may have been divided amongst your family, but the curation of your grandmother has been lost, right? And that sort of made me reflect on what really runs through both of your projects is the curation of the family album, almost in a way, and the pairing and the decision making around how you want to be shown and what words accompany your own image. And I guess I'm sort of trying to reflect on how that informs for you how you would like to be shown in institutional contexts. And I think for your case study, like how is that informed how the body of work has it been shown outside of a publication? I'm just curious about how does that translate into space?
Yeah.
Well, that body of work has only been shown once so far, together, as a body of work. But it always just depends on the place, the space, the people, leadership, and you were talking about like 10 years, right? 10 years. I was like, oh my God, I identify with that because all of my projects, it just takes so long to make, 10 years usually. And so I'm just thinking about that the entire time. And hopefully I'm collaborating with people that can understand. Mm-hmm. So I can't really say how it shows up in space because I think it would be different every single time,
I think the spatial element's really interesting in Dayanita's practice because she there's a whole part of the dissertation that discusses this, but she really believes in kind of multimodal practices. And she started out saying, I'm not a photographer, I'm a bookmaker. And she said, I don't want to privilege the wall the white wall as being the space of encounter. I want, the more intimate spaces of encounter, like the family album, I want to replicate that in my work and the books. But then through time, I don't know, either like she realized that it's hard to monetize books. She started to show much more wall works, but then she's also, the ICA Boston just acquired one of these really beautiful sculptures, which she calls them like moving museums, in which images, even from the Myself Mona Ahmed series, from her different series, she'll frame and she'll kind of put away in these shelves. And you, the viewer, can switch out the image that is currently on display. I mean, most museums actually don't let you touch it, but the idea is that a viewer could come and take part of the shelf, and then you kind of rehang. Private collectors could do it to their heart's content. And so Dayanita's really thinking about the spaces between archive, book, exhibition, the short answer is I think since this book, images from this book and then images from later series have all commingled in different kind of iterations and different spaces. And then I do think institutions own prints from singular prints from the photo book in collections, and she has sold those separately from the book. Yeah, so it kind of proliferates.
I'm happy to take more questions, but I wanted to follow up on a point too, because there was a question, Joshua, that I wanted to ask you specifically, but I think you're also referencing ideas about scale and sort of intimacy was another theme that came through both of your talks. Joshua, we have two photographs, one from Unrest in America and one from Love Without Justice, and they're both printed at like really larger than life-size scale in many ways. Can you talk us through your decision on sort of how to print and present them at that scale and that size?
Those specific pieces, or?
In general, maybe both, yes and.
Yes. Well, let me think about this. Hold on.
Yeah, take your time.
Well, a lot of my work is printed at very large scale. I think that, of course, scale can determine the impact of a piece. Not saying that everything has to always be big, but I think for me, if like pieces weren't extremely large, then they would be really tiny. Like there's kind of no middle for me. For example, I have these pieces in a series called Selfhood, which they're about 10-foot tall portraits, but they're kind of elevated on the wall. And so like the viewer's like forced to kind of look up anyways, which is it's very uncomfortable, but I kind of wanted that tension. Yeah, so I kind of make those little micro choices when thinking about scale or even positioning on the wall.
No, that's interesting. I mean, just sort of when you were talking about the act of looking through the book and the photo album, there's sort of this phenomenological experience that you want, and that Dayanita presumably wants when you're encountering these works.
Well, that's true as well. Looking at work in a book is totally different than a wall, and also this idea of people being able to kind of have some of the work and access it, which is really important to me. I think. I've worked in artist books before. Artist books, very small print runs, where people can actually read these responses from participants that I photograph, which seeing that work on a wall kind of changes it completely. But that's just how it goes. Yeah.
Thank you. Sasha.
so I was really struck by the use of books in both of yours. And so to kind of continue on that thinking, I want to talk a bit about the captions and how the captions relate to the relationship between the photographer, the photographed, and the reader or viewer. So one thing I was thinking about, you talked a bit about the relationship between Mona and Dayanita, but I was also curious about how the relationship plays out with Aisha too, as someone who's represented and not actually there as a voice. And then Joshua, with yours, I was really struck by the fact that you're referred to in third person in all of the captions.
Yeah.
It's not me here, it's Joshua. And so I was also thinking about what that does for kind of your relationship to the images, but also the viewer's relationship to you via the images as well.
Yeah, good question. We really thought about that. We really thought about it. How do we come to that? Because of the title. The title. Oh, when I say we, it's my studio. I get a lot of feedback, but studio assistant, curator, the editor, designer. And I can go down the list. And because I could have said I, but the title of the book is I Believe I'll Run On. And so people are already assuming that the book is based on me. But with the captions, did we, really want to say, this is me and my grandmother, or have names? And I thought it was important to have the names there. And so if I was going to name my grandmother Josephine, I had to say grandmother Josephine, not just Josephine or not just my grandmother. So that's just some of the reasoning behind either say all the names or none of them.
I think about the fact that there are actually a lot of other people represented in the book, or there are photos of other people. It's not just always Mona in the images, but Aisha's probably the most kind of prominent character outside of Mona. And I kind of use the word character deliberately because it ends up being, if we think about it in terms of biography, it ends up being this kind of supporting role. And I think it's actually really true that Aisha got taken away from Mona. And so I think Dayanita was then placed at a double distance from Aisha because the only way through was through Mona, and Mona had limited access to her. There are actually some images later where Mona goes to visit Aisha in her new home, and Aisha's grown up. But I've never really thought about that, though, the kind of maybe ethical consequence of never getting Aisha's consent, perhaps, to be represented, especially as a child. And now her image is everywhere. I'm sure she's a grown woman walking around in Delhi now. And so, that's maybe, something to contend with. I mean, I'll say kind of you could probably tell in the way that I was presenting it, it still remains a very unsettled question in the Indian art scene as to what exactly that relationship was. Only Dayanita knows, and Mona's passed away now. And she's very cagey, so nobody really knows what was going on. I've heard a lot of it's gossip. I've heard Dayanita paid all of Mona's medical bills, but I also hear that Dayanita never shared anything with Mona financially. So it's kind of, it's very dense and complex kind of situation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Well then, since we're going to reconvene for more conversation and questions, I think as a full group, I just want to ask you to please join me in thanking Sayantan and Joshua again for their fantastic presentations. So thank you.